Hello everyone, welcome to VLearn and welcome to our new course Introduction to the Genetics. I am Ashish Kumar, your host for the course Introduction to the Genetics. This course is perfectly suitable for the students who are preparing for NEET or the board examination. In this course of Introduction to the Genetics, we will deep dive into the concept of genetics from very beginning to the advanced level. So let's start our new course, Introduction to the Genetics. Before we deep dive into the concept of genetics, we will study some terms related to the genetics. So basically, what is genetics? Genetics is the study of heredity and variation. Now, here comes two terms, heredity and variation. Basically, what is heredity and variation? If we talk about heredity, heredity is transmission of character. The process of transmission of character from the parents to the offspring. So the transmission of character from the parents to the offspring. तो पेरेंट्स से ऑफस्प्रिंग के बीच में जो करेक्टर्स का ट्रांसमिशन होता है, दैट इज व्हाट वी कॉल्ड हेरेडिटी फ्रॉम द पेरेंट्स टू ऑफस्प्रिंग. Inheritance, heredity and inheritance, these are two closely related terms. What is inheritance? Inheritance is process of transmission of character, how these genes or how these characters are passed from parents to the offspring. The character transmission from the parents to the offspring is what we call heredity, and how these characters are transferred from the parents to the offspring is what we call inheritance. So heredity and inheritance are two closely related terms. So process of transmission, transmission of character or transmission of genes is what we call inheritance. The other term here is what we call variation. What is variation? Variation, if we talk about parents and our next generation, if we consider or observe all the characters in our generation and compare it to the parents, or we consider the parental character to the generational characters, we observe that most of the character in next generation is similar to our parental generation, but not all the character. Most of the characters are similar, but all the characters are not similar. So if we talk about all the characters are not similar. So all the characters are not similar. This difference in character, the difference in the character is what we call variation. So variation is basically what we call difference in character. So difference in character is what we call variation. In the further classes, we will study into the concept of variation in the deep detail and how this variation arises. So in next few classes, we will study about how these variations arises. If we talk about the concept of genetics, the concept of genetics was first given by scientist Georg John Mendel. But the term genetics, this is very important with respect to the NEET and MCQ examinations such as NSEB. Term genetics was basically not given by Gregor John Mendel, although the father of genetics is Gregor John Mendel. The father of genetics is Gregor John Mendel, but term genetics was given by Batson. So term was given by Batson, whereas father of genetics is Gregor John Mendel. Gregor John Mendel is the scientist who changed the thinking towards genetics. Before this, he was the first who gave the concept of classical genetics. If we talk about the era of genetics, what is classical genetics, we will discuss now. If we talk about the era of genetics, there are three eras of genetics. The first era is old era. Old era is basically pre-Mendelian era. This is outdated as well. The second generation is classical genetics. Classical genetics is basically what led to the Gregor John Mendel discovery. So it's all about Mendel. So it is also known as Mendelian genetics. Whereas the third era of genetics is what we called modern era of genetics. Modern era of the genetics is post-Mendelian genetics. After Mendel. Post-Mendelian genetics. Post-Mendelian genetics is also basically this is at the level of molecular. So it is also known as molecular genetics. So if we talk about all these genetics concept, we will not study about pre-Mendelian genetics because this is outdated. So there is no point of studying the pre-Mendelian genetics concept. We will study deep into the detail the classical genetics, that is the Mendelian genetics, and then we will also study the post-Mendelian genetics or the molecular genetics. So these two concepts, that is classical genetics and post-Mendelian genetics, will be studied in the next few classes. Let's move to the Gregor John Mendel, scientist, the father of genetics. Father of genetics, Gregor John Mendel, is very important for your NEET and board level molecular examination. The concept of genetics was first formed by father of genetics, Gregor John Mendel. Gregor John Mendel. So this class is basically related to the concept, how the term genetics, how Mendel studied the genetics, although the genetics concept was given by, the name of genetics was given by Batson. Gregor John Mendel. Gregor John Mendel was basically born on July 22 in the year 1822. Born on July 22 in the year 1822. So 1822. His life was from 1822 from 1884. So he born on 1822 and he died on 1884. These years basically are very important. कई बार नीट एग्जाम में या किसी बोर्ड लेवल एग्जाम में भी पूछ लिया जाता है when did Mendel died and when did Mendel born. He was an Austrian scientist and he was basically not even a biologist. He was a mathematician, he was a biostatistician. So he was a statistician. So basically what he did was he studied the concept of mathematics, included the concept of mathematics into the genetics, into the biology. He studied the experimental material chosen by Mendel was the experimental materials chosen by Mendel was Pisum sativum. Pisum sativum. Pisum sativum is basically what we call edible pea. यहाँ से क्वेश्चन आ जाता है भाई. The question is Pisum sativum जो है दैट इज एडिबल पी। कई बार नीट लेवल में पूछा गया है, नीट लेवल के एग्जामिनेशंस में पूछा गया है, द एक्सपेरिमेंटल मटेरियल फॉर द ग्रे जोन मेंडल वाज, एंड द फर्स्ट ऑप्शन जो दिया जाता है दैट इज इंस्टेड ऑफ एडिबल पी दे ऐड स्वीट पी, एंड जल्दबाजी में हम ऑप्शन टिक कर देते हैं स्वीट पी। Edible pea is completely different from sweet pea. He didn't experimented on sweet pea. Sweet pea is Lethyrus odoratus. He experimented on Pisum sativum. So it is Lethyrus odoratus. Whereas Mendel का जो experimental material था वो क्या था? Pisum sativum. So Pisum sativum, pea plant, edible pea plant was the experimental material. स्वीट पी के ऊपर कभी भी मेंडल ने कोई एक्सपेरिमेंट नहीं किया था, तो ही नेवर एक्सपेरिमेंटेड ऑन स्वीट पी। ही एक्सपेरिमेंटेड ऑन दिस मटेरियल दैट इज एडिबल पी फ्रॉम द ईयर 1856 to the 1863. 1856 to the year 1863. That's almost 7 years. So he experimented on edible pea plant for around 7 years. And this is also an important question, so mark it. Based on the experiment conducted on Pisum sativum edible pea plant, basically he founded the postulates or the principles of inheritance. Principle of inheritance. And these principles of inheritance were basically published in Natural History of Society of Bern, Natural History Society of Bern in the year 1865. तो 1856 से लेके 1863 तक उन्होंने एक्सपेरिमेंट किया, एंड जो एक्सपेरिमेंट किया उनसे उन्होंने कुछ पोस्टुलेट्स बनाए, कुछ प्रिंसिपल्स ऑफ इनहेरिटेंस बनाए। दिस प्रिंसिपल ऑफ इनहेरिटेंस वाज पब्लिश्ड इन द मैगजीन नेचुरल हिस्ट्री सोसाइटी ऑफ बर्न इन द ईयर 1865. He also wrote a paper. The name of the paper was Experiment on Plant Hybridization. Experiments on Plant Hybridization. This experiment on plant hybridization was published in Natural History Society of Bern in the year 1866. तो पहले 2 meetings हुई थी. The 2 meetings were conducted at the Natural History Society of the Bern, and then he wrote a paper. The name of the paper was Experiment on Plant Hybridization, and this experiment on the plant hybridization was published in the year 1866 in Natural History Society of Bern. And finally, in 1884, Mendel died without any recognition. Think about Mendel. Mendel was a great scientist. He did extraordinary works for the genetics and for the science. But without any recognition, he died in 1884. Before he died, he didn't got any recognition. So Mendel was even unaware of the concept that he is the father of genetics now, 30 years later. So Mendel was father of genetics 30 years later after he studied these concepts. That means these concepts of genetics which were studied by Mendel remain undiscovered for many years. In the next class, we will discuss how these works remain undiscovered for so many years. In the next class, we will also study who rediscovered the Mendel works, and then Mendel was regarded as father of genetics. We will also study why Mendel work was not published and what were the reasons of this huge success of Mendel. Thanks for watching the video. Welcome. I again welcome you to the channel, and I will appreciate if you like the video. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and please comment in the comment section.